Hey Life Designers, welcome to this week's episode of the vlog. We're going to continue this week exploring the blue zones, and last week we talked about the idea of hara-hachi-bu, and that whole focus of that principle is around being intentional about the quantity of food that you're eating. We're going to continue in a similar vein this week, although this week we're going to be focusing on what types of food you are actually eating. And if you read the blog down below, you kind of know the punchline. If you haven't read the blog down below, I definitely recommend you check that out, because in that article I summarized the key points from the Blue Zone book, where the authors outline a number of strategies for thinking about what you are putting into your body. And like I said, if you did already check out the write-up below, then you know the punchline, which is all 5 of the Blue Zone locations have adopted a predominantly plant-based diet. And we're going to talk about a little bit about how you might go about doing that in your own life, but really more importantly, how you can be more intentional in your own eating habits. So if that sounds appealing to you, then stick with us, because we're going to jump right in. I really struggled to come up with the content for this week's video portion. It's true that since coming back from Ikaria, I have made some changes to my personal eating habits, but do you really want to know about what I'm eating on a day-to-day basis? Probably not. In fact, is there anything more annoying than somebody who is on a particular diet? It seems that that's all people talk about when they're on a particular diet, or when they've got a new workout routine. It just seems to dominate every conversation, and frankly, most people have no interest whatsoever. So that said, really the lesson today is about intentionality, and how to be just more intentional, more aware of the eating decisions that you are making, rather than advocating for a particular style of eating, or the plant slant, as the book would say. I'm really going to talk about just how to get more intentionality into your own life. I am definitely not a nutrition expert, and I don't try to portray myself as one. But I am very intentional about what I consume, and how often I eat certain foods, and the quantities of the foods that I eat. I am a fairly intentional eater, and over the years I've had a fair degree of success in making changes to my eating habits. And I think part of that is because I avoid the extremes, and I make small incremental decisions that move me in a particular direction, and I'm willing to kind of approach it in a certain way that lends itself to sustainability. So that's really going to be the focus of our chat today. So my recommendation is to find out what works for you personally. It feels to me that there is no shortage of experts on the market who want to tell you what to eat, and these people are in my opinion good intentioned. They're well intentioned, and they're also well versed, and very often very well educated on their particular field of study. And yet, with all of this education and deep understanding, there's very little consensus. There's very little agreement about what works best, what we should be eating. And, and it covers the extremes. It's not like we're close. I mean, you've got some people who are advocating veganism or vegetarianism or plant slants, like they do in the Blue Zone book, all the way to the other extreme, where they're recommending high-fat diets that consist of lots of meats, and all the way to the extreme of perhaps the Atkins diet might be at one end of the spectrum. The reality is there's very little consensus, and I really just think that the best diet is the one that works for you. So what it comes down to are really 2 basic questions that you have to answer. What does my body need? What works best for my body? And then the second question is, how do you know? So what works best for me, and then how do I know? These are the 2 questions that we're going to explore a little bit deeper. So the first question, what does my body need? I really do believe that this is a person-specific question and answer. You really have to figure out what is best for your particular body and your particular state of health right now. For example, are you predisposed to a certain medical condition like cancer or heart disease or stroke or diabetes or neurodegenerative disease? Are you predisposed to any of these particular conditions? And if so, which diet is best to help you manage that particular risk over time? Are you dealing with a particular medical situation or health situation right now where your diet needs to have a certain angle or a certain look and feel to it to best support that particular situation that you're in right now? These are all very specific to the person. In addition to that, I really just think people's bodies do react differently to different intakes, and it's super important that you kind of know your own body and know what works well for you, and really listen to other perspectives and actively seek out other people's perspectives, but then don't just take those recommendations wholesale. Put them through a little bit of pressure testing and try to figure out what really is going to work best for you. So now the second question, how do I know, is not trivial. And it's easy to overlook, and I really do think that most people do a very poor job of correlating the foods that they eat to the results that they get. And I'm not just talking about long-term results. I mean, those are important too, but those are a little bit harder to correlate. I'm actually talking about short-term results. Like, for example, what is your energy level like after you eat certain foods? Or what is your cognitive ability after you eat certain foods, and how long after you eat those foods do these effects last? How does your sleep correlate to the food that you ate throughout the day or that you ate later in the evening? Is timing a factor? These are all going to be different, I think, for different people, and the only way to identify a pattern is to pay attention. You have to look at the food you ate, and you have to look at how you felt shortly thereafter, and then in a couple hours after. And you really have to write it down, because you're not going to remember. And you don't have to write it down forever. You just have to write it down until you can establish a pattern, and really approach it like an experiment. If you were designing an experiment, how would you go about it? You would introduce one variable, and you would see what effect it had. Then you would change a different variable, and then you would see what effect it had, and you would write that down. You would be systematic. You would be intentional about how you go about that. And an example from my own life where this has really paid off is with regards to my allergies. I used to have terrible allergies. Every year, every season, for 4 or 5 weeks, I would be absolutely suffering. But since I have gotten into the habit of reducing the amount of breads and pastas and potatoes and sugars that I take into my body, my allergies are almost non-existent. All the people around me are suffering from dogwood or cedar, whatever happens to be blooming at the time, and I have been largely unaffected. The only time that I get affected now by these types of allergies is when I slip off of my disciplined regimen and I eat a bunch of those foods. I overindulge, and it's just I just know this about my own body. It's just something I've come to learn, and something that I've built into my lifestyle. So knowing your own body, knowing your own patterns is super crucial. So what works best for me, and then how do I know, are the two questions you really want to be asking. So really the goal here is to, like I said, and I say over and over again, is to be intentional about what you are eating. Just notice when your eating patterns are just totally mindless and really not thinking about the food that you're putting into your body. If you give yourself the opportunity to consider what you're eating, I promise you will make better decisions. And hopefully you are enjoying this Blue Zone series. I know that I'm enjoying sharing some of the lessons that I got from the Blue Zone book, but also from my trip to Ikaria. And we've got a few more weeks of this. There are 9 principles that are outlined in the book. If you haven't checked out the Blue Zone book, I definitely recommend that you do that. There'll be a link down in the blog below. And as always, I appreciate your time and your attention. I look forward to our paths crossing again in the future, and I wish you a prosperous journey. Take care.